If I'm gonna die or ever be a sacrifice, I want to make sure that my life made at least 5 million kids happy.
It is hard to ignore how often the story of a young rapper ends not in old age or retirement, but in a sudden burst of gunfire. And today, this episode is going to walk you step by step through 6 of the most talked about cases. So before we dive deep into these stories, make sure you subscribe and follow this channel so you never miss an episode like this again.
Survive a second. Rap star Tupac Shakur died last night after a brief life in a rough business. He was 25.
For this conversation, the journey starts in 1996 with Tupac Shakur. Because that is the point where the modern legend of the fallen rapper really explodes into the global consciousness and turns hip-hop tragedy into a worldwide conversation about violence, money, loyalty, and power. Tupac was already one of the biggest names in music, but he was also caught in a storm of label politics, street ties, and an East Coast versus West Coast rivalry that had turned personal and public at the same time. He had joined Death Row Records after being bailed out of prison. He was closely linked to powerful figures in Los Angeles gang culture, and he was also known for speaking directly about violence and disrespect in his lyrics and interviews, all of which made him both a star and a target in multiple directions. On the night of the shooting in Las Vegas, he left a Mike Tyson fight with label boss Suge Knight, got into a physical altercation with a man in the hotel lobby, and then later that night a car pulled up alongside their BMW and opened fire, hitting Tupac several times. He died in hospital a few days later, and the case has never been officially solved, which is part of what keeps the conspiracies alive about who wanted him gone. Whether it was connected to that fight in the lobby, to street beef, to music industry rivalries, or to a mix of everything swirling around him at that time. When people ask why Tupac ended up in that situation, the uncomfortable answer is that he was living at the sharp edge of fame and real street politics at the same moment, surrounded by people who move between music, gangs, and big money. So once certain lines were crossed in public, it became very easy for someone to decide that violence was a solution that could send a message, protect their own ego, or remove a powerful rival. Only a few months later, in 1997, another giant of hip-hop, the Notorious Big, found himself in a very similar final scene on the opposite side of the country, and this made the pattern feel even more like a tragic script. Biggie, who was associated with Bad Boy Records and identified with the East Coast in that highly publicized rivalry, traveled to Los Angeles to promote his new album and to work on easing tensions after Tupac's death. At least that was part of the public narrative. He attended a music industry party, left in a convoy of vehicles, and at a red light a car pulled up next to his vehicle and a gunman fired into the SUV where he was sitting in the front passenger seat. He was hit multiple times and died shortly afterward, at only 24 years old.
Yeah, we need an ambulance on Fairfax and Wilshire. Please, Los Angeles. We have a man shot. We have a man shot.
Okay, hold on, I'll get
Right
that.
on the corner, Wilshire and Fairfax. Straight up Fairfax. Let's go, let's go.
Sir, hold on. Listen, sir, I can't hear what you're saying.
We're man shot in our car right now. Right now, we're trying to roll him to the hospital. I know the way. See the sign out. You gotta go back. You gotta turn around, Jimmy. You're going the wrong way. Hey, what the fuck is wrong with y'all, man? What's wrong? Yo, Big, you hear me?
Big.
I think somebody's trying to kill me. I'll be waking up paranoid. I'll be really scared. I'll just be paranoid.
Just like with Tupac, his murder remains officially unsolved, with different theories pointing to possible involvement from gangs, rogue police officers, or people who had something to gain from continuing the feud instead of letting it calm down.
You're messing with lives here, and that's exactly what happened. 2 lives were lost as a result of what? Stupidity?
The deeper question is why he was in that situation in the first place, and again, it comes back to the combination of massive fame, a reputation built on realistic street stories, a public rivalry that had escalated beyond music, and an environment where powerful people believed that violence could be used to protect business interests, settle old scores, or silence someone who knew too much. In both Tupac and Biggie's cases, the money involved in labels, publishing, and catalogs meant that their deaths did not stop the flow of revenue, and in some ways even increased it, which feeds the dark idea that there were people who stood to benefit financially from them being martyrs rather than living, opinionated artists who might change direction or leave their labels. Fast forward about 20 years and the music landscape has changed, but the bullets are still there, this time hitting younger artists who were born after the deaths of Tupac and Biggie, but stepped into the same cycle of fame, danger, and easy access to guns. One of the clearest examples is the rapper Tentacion, a hugely influential but very controversial figure for the new generation. By the time he was 20, he had millions of followers online, streaming numbers in the hundreds of millions, and a reputation for both vulnerability and violence in his personal life. On the day he died, he went to a motorcycle dealership in Florida to shop for a new bike. And on his way out, armed men blocked his car, confronted him, and tried to rob him of a bag believed to be holding a lot of cash.
And tonight, disturbing surveillance video showing the murder of South Florida rapper XXX Tentacion and the moments leading up to it.
The 20-year-old was killed back in June, and 4 men have since been indicted. CBS 4's Carrie Codd is in Fort Lauderdale with the story.
Surveillance cameras capture the ambush of rapper XXX Tentacion as he prepared to leave a Deerfield Beach motorcycle dealership last June. The cameras show a vehicle block the rapper's exit, and then men jump out of the vehicle and confront XXX Tentacion. One of the men goes into his car. Then there's a confrontation and a robbery, and the men shoot and kill the talented young artist. Surveillance video also showed XXX inside the dealership that day when at least one of the suspects walked past him. A short time later, the drama unfolded outside. 4 men in all are charged in the murder. One of them, Robert Allen, appeared in court this week asking to have his bond reduced.
In this case, the motive looks much more like direct greed than music beef, but even here the lines are blurred, because his fame and the image he projected made him a target for people who saw him not as a human being, but as a walking bag full of money. He moved without heavy security. He liked to live in a fairly open way, and in an environment where guns are common and social media makes it easy to track a celebrity's movements, that combination becomes deadly. The people who wanted to benefit from his death were not necessarily rivals in music, but armed robbers who saw a moment to cash out. And in a wider sense, the streaming platforms, labels, and estates that profit from the spike in streams and sales whenever an artist is killed also become part of that uncomfortable conversation about who gains after a tragedy. Only 2 years later, in 2020, the hip-hop world watched another rising star, Pop Smoke, get cut down in a different but related way, again mixing fame, money, and the perception of vulnerability. Pop Smoke was part of the drill wave and brought a gritty, aggressive sound from Brooklyn to the global stage, but his life ended in a rented house in the Hollywood Hills during what appears to have been a targeted home invasion. Earlier, some photos he shared online revealed parts of the address and showed designer bags and cash, giving people with bad intentions a clear signal about where he was and what valuables might be inside. In the early morning, masked intruders entered the house, confronted the occupants, and during a brief and chaotic encounter, Pop Smoke was shot, later dying from a gunshot wound to the chest. The suspects were very young themselves, teenagers and a young adult, allegedly motivated by robbery and possibly clout, as if killing a rising star was just another extreme step in a life of crime. The question of why Pop Smoke ended up in that position is tied to how young artists sometimes move without professional security, how they can accidentally expose their own location and wealth online, and how the culture around them can treat them like trophies to be hunted rather than people to be protected. Again, the immediate benefit for the attackers was robbery, but later, the posthumous releases, the surge in streams, and the way brands and labels continue to monetize his image also show how the machine keeps running long after the artist is gone. Around 2019, another tragedy hit the community, this time in Los Angeles with Nipsey Hussle, whose story is very different on the surface but rooted in the same soil of environment, history, and access to guns. Nipsey was not just a rapper, but a businessman and community figure who invested in real estate, opened businesses in his own neighborhood, and spoke openly about wanting to break the cycle of gang violence and economic neglect. On the day he died, he was outside his Marathon clothing store in South LA, talking with people in the parking lot, when a man he knew from the neighborhood approached. There was a heated conversation, and that man left and came back armed. He then fired multiple shots at Nipsey and others, reportedly even kicking Nipsey as he lay on the ground before running away. Later, he was arrested and convicted, with prosecutors describing the killing as a personal dispute connected to ego, respect, and gang politics rather than a music industry conspiracy. Nipsey was in that situation because he never fully left the environment he came from. He wanted to be accessible, to stand in front of his store, to talk to people face to face. But that same accessibility meant that anyone with anger, jealousy, or a bruised ego could walk up and turn an argument into a murder. The benefit here for the killer was twisted pride or revenge in the moment. But beyond that, Nipsey's death also boosted the value of his catalog and brands, again proving that the system knows how to turn even a community leader's death into more revenue and mythology. Then, in 2022, it happened again with Takeoff from the group Migos. And what makes his case particularly heartbreaking is how often people describe him as the quiet one, the most laid-back member, someone who was not usually mixed up in drama. That night, he was at a bowling alley in Houston, hanging out during a private event with people playing dice and talking. And at some point, an argument broke out involving others around him. Witnesses say he was not the one yelling or pushing. Yet when shots were fired in the middle of that late-night chaos, he was the one who took the fatal bullets, hit in the head and torso, and died on the scene. His label and friends have described it as senseless violence and implied that he was more of a bystander than a target, which highlights another ugly truth. In a culture where guns are present at celebrations, arguments, and ego clashes can escalate so fast that the person who dies is sometimes not even the person in the argument. Takeoff ended up in that situation because even a peaceful artist can still be surrounded by people who are carrying weapons, who may be drunk or angry, and whose split-second decisions can change everything. The people who benefited from his death are not obvious individuals, but, again, the system that turns grief into streams, media attention, and nostalgia, while the actual bullet that killed him probably came from someone who simply wanted to win an argument with gunfire instead of words. To fully understand why this whole pattern feels like a curse on hip-hop, it is useful to briefly look at someone who did not die, but whose story shows how close many rappers have come to the edge, and that is the case of 50 Cent. Before becoming one of the most successful rappers and businessmen in the game, he was shot multiple times in New York in what has been widely discussed as a targeted attack. The assailant fired 9 shots at close range, hitting him in areas including his face, hand, and legs, yet he survived after a long recovery period.
No pressure or anything.
I got, shot 9 times, but it was one time. So, and I just didn't see the person coming, or I would have avoided it.
Yes, you would.
This happened, and I was trying to write a song conceptually that would define more of who I am. So I wrote 9 shots and just picked 9 painful moments that I experienced in my life and used the shot as a metaphor.
But the 9...
Where were you shot? Where?
Like in front of my grandmother's house.
But where on your body?
That's like being at the doctor's office, isn't it?
I got hit a few, most of them in the legs. I got hit in my hand and I got hit in the face. So like the fragment portion of it is in my tongue. So it kind of changed the way I speak a little bit. Like.
And you're rapping as well.
Yeah.
What is it still in your tongue?
Can you see it?
Yeah, it's great for oral sex.
Is it?
That survival became part of his image, helping to market him as a man who had literally been through war, and it shows how the same kind of environment can result in dramatically different outcomes. If the angle or distance had been slightly different, he could easily have been another name on the list of dead rappers rather than the face of a global brand. The motives people talk about in his case include street disputes, drug trade connections, and people who feared what he might say or do as his fame grew. In other words, the same mix of money, ego, and fear that appears around many other artists. His survival does not change the pattern. It just proves that for every rapper who dies, there are others who are wounded and carry the physical and psychological scars while continuing to perform, sometimes still surrounded by the same dangers that nearly killed them. When looking across these stories from Tupac and Biggie in the 90s to XXXTentacion, Pop Smoke, Nipsey Hussle, and Takeoff in the last decade, some common threads stand out very clearly, and they help explain why these men found themselves in deadly situations. The first thread is environment. Many rappers come from neighborhoods where violence, gangs, and guns are already part of everyday life. And even after they become rich and famous, they still move in or around those spaces, either because they feel a responsibility to stay connected or because they have not yet built a safer lifestyle with professional security and strict boundaries. That environment also includes people who might feel abandoned, jealous, or disrespected when an artist's life changes, and who may think that killing a star will settle a personal score or prove a point. The second thread is money and image. Rappers often display wealth publicly through jewelry, cars, cash, and social media posts, and this not only inspires fans but also attracts robbers and opportunists who see them as high-value targets. The third thread is ego and public conflict. In hip-hop, there is a long tradition of battles and disses, and while most of it stays on wax, sometimes the mix of pride, anger, and social media pressure pushes someone to take things into real life with guns. There is also the deeper question of who benefits each time a rapper dies, and the answers are uncomfortable because they spread beyond a single villain. In some cases, like HipHop and Pop Smoke, the direct benefit for the killers is robbery, the cash and valuables they can grab in the moment, and perhaps the twisted status they feel from having taken down someone famous. In other cases, like Tupac, Biggie, and Nipsey, there are people who benefit from the removal of a rival, the quieting of a critical voice, or the elimination of someone who knows too much about what goes on behind the scenes in music and street politics. On a larger scale, record labels, streaming platforms, and estates see a predictable spike in streams and sales when an artist dies, turning them into eternal icons whose work is repackaged and promoted as a legacy, sometimes in ways the artist might never have approved of while alive. The neighborhoods where they came from do not usually benefit. They lose a role model, an employer, or a symbol of hope, while money generated by posthumous projects often flows away from the people who grew up with them. Another layer to why it keeps happening is how guns are treated in certain parts of society as normal tools in a dispute instead of last resort weapons. Whether it is a robbery on a Florida street, a home invasion in Hollywood, an argument outside a club in Houston, or a parking lot disagreement in South Los Angeles, the presence of firearms turns moments that could end in insults and bruised egos into permanent tragedies. Rappers are not the only victims of this pattern, but because they live such public lives and often portray the harsh realities of their environments, their deaths become symbols of a wider crisis. For many young artists, there is pressure to stay accessible, to move without looking scared, to keep ties to the block, and yet that same accessibility is what makes them easy targets. Without serious investment in community safety, conflict resolution, economic opportunities, and mental health support, the cycle continues, and the culture keeps losing its voices just as they are reaching their full power. What ties all these stories together is that none of these rappers simply woke up and decided to die in gunfire. They were pushed into dangerous spaces by a mix of history, environment, personal choices, and other people's greed and fear. Tupac and Biggie were caught in a web of label power, gang connections, and public rivalry that turned their every move into a potential flashpoint. HipHop and Pop Smoke were young stars surrounded by sudden wealth and online visibility, moving in worlds where enemies could track them and see their money. Nipsey Hussle chose to invest in a community that loved him, but also contained unresolved conflicts and dangerous individuals. Takeoff just happened to stand in the wrong place at the wrong time while other people argued with guns nearby. When asking who wanted these deaths, it is important to look at the individual shooters, the people who might have ordered them, and the system that keeps rewarding the spectacle of dead legends, because all of them play a role in why this keeps happening. As you listen to these stories, the goal is not just to feel the shock again, but to understand the deeper forces at play so that future artists do not have to become the next tragic headline. If this breakdown has opened your eyes to how these deaths connect, remember to subscribe and follow the channel because there are many more layers to explore about hip-hop, power, and survival, and this journey is only just beginning.